We've got a ton to discuss on today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. Welcome in. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. First up, we're going to tell you why the Pittsburgh Steelers decided to trade George Pickens. Now, I'm talking about the real reason why they traded George Pickens here. Then we'll talk about why I don't think the Pittsburgh Steelers will trade for either Tyreek Hill or Brandon Aiyuk to replace George Pickens. Then we'll talk about some more realistic options on the wide receiver trade market, where apparently the Steelers have reached out to the Green Bay Packers. I'll let you guys know which receivers they could be targeting on the Packers roster. Then we'll finish up today's show with the most likely wide receiver 2 options. I think there's 6 wide receivers that I think are the most likely to be targeted by the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason to replace Pickens. But before we get into the content today, yesterday the Cowboys report had 2,842 likes on their video breaking down the George Pickens trade. Our goal today is to beat them, and Tom Downey, the host of the Cowboys report, told me today, whoever gets more likes wins the trade. All right, so if you want George Pickens to stink with the Dallas Cowboys and you want us to win that trade, make sure you click that thumbs up icon to kick off today's show. So something that I've been seeing a lot on Steelers Twitter here lately, guys, since the George Pickens trade went down, is a lot of people are kind of confused as to why the Steelers traded him, because he's a good player and they traded him away for future draft capital in a year where the Steelers are kind of projecting out there a message of we're trying to win now. So a lot of people have been saying on Steelers Twitter, well, I guess they're embracing a rebuild, or they're going into a transition year this year because they got rid of George Pickens. And the reality of the situation here, guys, is the Steelers are still in win now mode. They are still trying to win now, but you might be saying at home, but Jack, they traded George Pickens away. So why would that be the case? Why would you trade a good player on your roster for future draft capital if you're trying to win now? Plain and simply, the reality is they just wanted Pickens out of their locker room, and they couldn't depend on him to be the professional that they would have really relied on him to be as their number 2 wide receiver. And, just look at the evidence for what the Pittsburgh Steelers have done this offseason, guys. They didn't fire Mike Tomlin. They traded for and paid a star-level wide receiver in DK Metcalf. They signed Darius Slay as the number 2 cornerback of this team. He is 34 years old and heading into the final year of his career. It doesn't really seem like a rebuild kind of move. And then also, they're not trading any other veterans on this team. They're not trading TJ Watt. They're not trading Cam Hayward. They're not trading Minkah Fitzpatrick. All the other established veterans are safe on this roster. And then, they're pursuing a 40-plus-year-old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who's going to turn 41 this year during the NFL season. None of these moves are signs that the Steelers are trying to blow things up or rebuild or go into a transition year or not try to win this year. Just plain and simply, the Pittsburgh Steelers couldn't depend on George Pickens. That is why they traded him, is because they didn't depend on him to show up to work on time, whether it was meetings, whether it was practices, even games. Last year during the Kansas City Chiefs game on Christmas, apparently he showed up late, right? They just couldn't rely on him to bring the right attitude to work on a day in and day out basis and to be a good contributing member of a potential championship team and be a contributor to that championship level team. And you guys can see the problems that they had to deal with, right? Late to meetings, practices, and games, the punctuality issues. The reports on those things ran rampant to start the offseason. Then the poor attitude and body language. We saw it throughout his time here in Pittsburgh, where he would pout on the sidelines, or he would, he would fight opponents if he got frustrated sometimes, all this different stuff. And then the lack of effort on the field. And I think this really stuck in the craw of head coach Mike Tomlin. When you look at the film and you see George Pickens just not try on a number of reps per game, whether it's as a run blocker, whether it's as a route runner when he knows he's not going to get the football, the level of effort just wasn't there for George Pickens, and as a result, the Steelers just couldn't rely on him, so that's why they sent him elsewhere. Now, that doesn't mean that the Steelers aren't looking towards the future. They absolutely are preparing themselves to build for the future as well as try to win in the present. You guys can take a look at the 2026 draft picks that they currently have at their disposal. They have 3 third-rounders. They have 2 picks in rounds 4, 5, and 6, and a total of 12 total picks at their disposal right now in 2026. And the reason why they've been accumulating all these picks for 2026 is because they understand that that is the year that they got to get their new franchise quarterback. And whoever that's going to be, whether it's Drew Aller, whether it's Nussmeier, whether it's somebody else, Archie Manning, who really knows at this point dictate who's going to come out in next year's draft or whatever, but the Steelers are going to be drafting their next franchise quarterback next year, probably in round 1, and now they have the ammunition to go up and make sure that they can get their guy at the most important position in the game next offseason. Not to mention, because you got 12 picks at your disposal here, you can use one of those to trade for a brand new wide receiver 2 to replace George Pickens and to pair with DK Metcalf here as things continue on forward here heading into the 2025 season. And Ian Rappaport did say yesterday that he would be quote-unquote surprised if Pittsburgh didn't add another wide receiver this offseason. So the Steelers are not done. The Steelers feel like they can replace George Pickens with a functional player that can be a legitimate number 2 receiver, only this time somebody that they can depend on as a professional, something they never had with George Pickens in their locker room. If you're wondering how this whole situation affects Aaron Rodgers, I wouldn't be shocked if Rodgers kind of knew about this kind of Pickens situation, if he knew that the team was planning on letting him go, because he has been working out with DK Metcalf. Ian Rappaport reported yesterday that he has actually worked out with DK Metcalf multiple times this offseason. He never worked out with George Pickens once, all right? So that is something to keep in mind, where Rodgers probably was aware that Pickens was going to be dealt elsewhere, and maybe a potential reason why he hasn't signed on the dotted line yet is because he's waiting for the Steelers to make their move and to kind of lock in their next wide receiver 2 before he makes a decision. Now, coming up here on Steelers Talk, the latest Steelers wide receiver rumors. I'm going to tell you why I don't think the Steelers are going to trade for either Tyreek Hill or Brandon Aiyuk, 2 guys that have been connected to the Steelers in recent days. But before we get into the rest of the wide receiver talk here on Steelers Talk today, let's talk about the receiver we know is going to be wearing black and gold in 2025, and that is DK Metcalf. And you can buy his brand new Pittsburgh Steelers number 4 jersey from our friends at Fanatics today when you go to chatsports.com/DK. If you use that link, I'll put that link in the comments and description of today's show. You click that link and you make a purchase. Fanatics sends us part of the proceeds to help us out here at Steelers Talk. So if you want to help yourself out and get a jersey, and you want to help us out here at Steelers Talk by giving us a little bit of financial support, you can go to chatsports.com/DK and get this jersey in your closet today. Now, for me, guys, I do think that Tyreek Hill and Brandon Aiyuk, those are kind of the 2 biggest names that have been kind of thrown out there over the last 24 hours or so in terms of a replacement for George Pickens. I think both of them are pretty unlikely at this point in the offseason. The reason why I think a Tyreek Hill trade is unlikely is not only are the GM and head coach there in Miami on the hot seat, and they probably want to have Tyreek Hill on their roster, but they don't really have any incentive to trade Hill until after June 1st this year, all right? And the reason for that is the amount of dead cap that they'd be taking on if they traded him pre-June 1st versus post-June 1st, where they would have almost $30 million against their cap this year if they traded him pre-June 1st versus trading him after June 1st, where they only take on $10.8 million in dead cap. So if Pittsburgh really wants a shot at Tyreek, they're going to have to wait a whole other month, essentially, for June 1st to get here, and then they can trade for him. But I just don't think Pittsburgh's going to want to wait that long, especially if, like I said, Rodgers is waiting for the Steelers to make their move here so that he can kind of know what his wide receiver room is going to look like. I'm not sure if the Steelers are going to want to wait all the way until June to trade for their new top wide receiver. And then when it comes to Brandon Aiyuk, Mike Florio went on Pittsburgh radio yesterday and said, and I quote, the 49ers would love to unload Brandon Aiyuk's contract on the Steelers, unquote. And that has really sparked up these Brandon Aiyuk trade rumors once again here in Steelers Nation. But once again, Mike Florio just doesn't know what he's talking about, okay? Because he just doesn't understand the dynamics of the contract situation that Brandon Aiyuk has with the San Francisco 49ers. Here is the problem that you guys need to know about and what makes it unlikely Aiyuk will be traded to the Steelers this offseason. Almost $48 million, all right, was fully guaranteed in roster bonuses once we got to April 1st. Now, the 49ers were shopping Brandon Aiyuk before those roster bonuses kicked in, but now that we're past April 1st and the 49ers are on the hook for that $48 million guaranteed on Brandon Aiyuk's contract, it makes just 0 sense for them to trade him. So unless they just really don't want Brandon Aiyuk in their building and they're willing to take on a crap ton of dead cap money over the next several seasons, and pretty much give Brandon Aiyuk to the Steelers essentially for free and on a super low contract, contract number for the next 4 seasons, it just doesn't really make sense for the 49ers. But if the 49ers really are willing to trade him, the Pittsburgh Steelers should 100% be in on getting him because he's still a really good route runner, a fantastic fit for the Steelers offense, and he comes cheap because the San Francisco 49ers are not only on the hook for the signing bonus that they got him for when he signed that extension, but also the roster bonuses for both 2025 and 2026 that kicked in on April 1st. So the Steelers don't have to pay any of that money on his contract, all right? So he's supremely affordable. You get him for the next 4 years. If he's available, the Pittsburgh Steelers should absolutely be in on Brandon Aiyuk. But like I said, because of the money kind of situation, I think it's highly unlikely San Francisco comes to the table. So if Tyreek Hill and Brandon Aiyuk are out of the equation here, what are some of the more realistic wide receiver targets to replace George Pickens? Well, it sounds like the Steelers are kind of putting their eye on the Green Bay Packers, where according to multiple reports, Andrew Filipponi and Zachary Smith both reported today that the Pittsburgh Steelers have called about Green Bay Packer wide receivers in the recent hours. And the two guys that they have reportedly asked about are Romeo Doubs and Dontaviyon Wicks. Both of these guys are relatively young wide receivers. Wicks entered the league in 2023. Doubs entered it in 2022, so he actually has a little bit of experience playing with Aaron Rodgers. And between these two guys, I do think Doubs is the guy that the Steelers are probably targeting because Rodgers apparently really likes his skill set. He had a really nice rapport and chemistry with Rodgers in his rookie season there in Green Bay in 2022. If you're looking for somebody that's a really good route runner, brings great size to the table, and he can make some great downfield catches. I mean, the back shoulder ball that Rodgers and Doubs had there in Green Bay in 2022 was really, really nice. So if you're looking for somebody that Rodgers would like, I think Romeo Doubs is the guy that they're probably targeting. So now let's talk about the most likely wide receiver 2 solutions for the Pittsburgh Steelers here. And Doubs is my number one guy. I do think that the Steelers see that he's a young receiver that can be on this team for a long time. They're not getting somebody that's older, somebody that's a really good route runner. He's played in an offense that asks him to run block before. That's what they do there in Green Bay. With the chemistry that he has with Aaron Rodgers, that's just an added bonus to help this team make their final case to get Rodgers to sign on the dotted line. Number 2, I'm going to go with a free agency option here in Keenan Allen. And 2 years ago, Allen was unbelievable, man. He was arguably a top 10 receiver in the game 2 years ago with the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, he's getting older. He had a down year last year in Chicago. But to be fair to Keenan, it was a complete disaster offensively as a whole in Chicago last year. So I think even though he's 33 years old, even though he does have a little bit of an injury history, he is a route running savant. He is super smart and savvy. He is tough, and he is exactly the type of veteran presence that the Steelers would bring in if they are truly in win-now mode. Number 3, I'll go with Amari Cooper, who is still somebody that is still a pretty good receiver. Now, again, like Keenan Allen, he was like a legit number 1 receiver back in 2023. He took a step back from that in 2024, but he is still a big body that can run really, really good routes. And he did have a little bit of a drop issue last year, but he is still a really, really good football player, guys, and would be an excellent number 2 receiver here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 4, I'd say Gabe Davis. Formerly with the Jacksonville Jaguars and Buffalo Bills. He's an excellent run blocker, which is why you got to keep your eye on him here. I think Arthur Smith would really appreciate the way this guy run blocks and the effort he brings to the table. Plus, he's a great downfield threat. So if you're looking for a big body downfield vertical threat, that's what Davis brings to the table. But the route running in the short and intermediate levels of the field, not all that great. And for a bigger body guy, doesn't have the best hands in the world. Number 5, I'll say Dontaviyon Wicks. Like I said, I think the Steelers are probably more in favor of getting Romeo Doubs because of his connection with Aaron Rodgers, but Wicks is a big physical wide receiver that runs pretty good routes, and he's another guy with a little bit of a drop issue here, but he definitely fits what the Steelers want to do from a schematic standpoint for sure. He's a good run blocker. Then number 6, I'll go Allen Lazard. Now, you might be saying at home, Jack, Lazard said he's not leaving on Twitter yesterday. Well, guess what? He doesn't have a choice in the matter, all right? The Jets can trade him away if they want. If the Steelers come to them and say, we'll give you a draft pick, and that's acceptable to the New York Jets, Lazard is coming to Pittsburgh whether he likes it or not, all right? And I think he would come around to that fact because he's got an excellent connection with Aaron Rodgers. I would say Lazard is probably the last name on my most likely solutions here, and I think Romeo Doubs is my number one guy that I think that they're going to go get. But some other names to keep your eye on here, Jaden Reed from the Green Bay Packers. It's certainly possible the Steelers have inquired about him. He's excellent after the catch and a great downfield threat, a great screen receiver as well, bubble screen type guy. Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce are two starting level wide receivers that maybe with Adonai Mitchell rising up the ranks there at Indianapolis, maybe they'd be willing to let go of one of those two receivers in Indy. Then Jacoby Myers is a really good number 2 receiver type out of Las Vegas. Great run blocker, great hands, can make some really tough catches and a good enough route runner. Steelers showed some interest in Adam Thielen last year at the trade deadline with the addition of Tedorora McMillan, and Thielen likely going into the final season of his NFL career. Could Carolina trade Thielen for like a day 3 draft pick? It's certainly something to keep your eye on. And then Curtis Samuel is somebody that's a really good yak threat, somebody that's a slot weapon. With the emergence of Khalil Shakir there in Buffalo, Samuel is certainly on the trade block. And then the guys that I would say probably are less likely or just not happening that I've seen thrown out there on Steelers Twitter, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Aiyuk. We talked about the reasons why those guys are unlikely earlier in today's show. DJ Moore I've seen thrown out there, but he just signed a new deal. And even though he had a down year last year in Chicago, they have no reason to let him go. Adonai Mitchell, I think, is somebody that the Colts believe in. And then Christian Kirk, not only was he traded to the Houston Texans this year, but that's pretty much the reason why the Steelers probably won't get him. But predict it for me down there in the comments section. Which wide receiver do you think that the Steelers are going to bring in? Don't tell me the one that you want them to bring in. Tell me the one that you think they will bring in this offseason. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. Thank you to all the real ones that made it to the end of today's show. I will see you guys tomorrow with more in-depth, informative, and free Steelers coverage right here on the channel. And until then, guys, here we go, Steelers.